Well, some of you who are familiar with the rock band Black Sabbath may assume it came from their album jacket, "We Sold Our Souls for Rock and Roll." But you may also suspect that the concept goes back a little bit farther than that, and you'd be right. The Bible, Holy Scripture, actually has a lot to say about the concept of turning the human soul over to evil instead of good. The Bible is actually a collection of 66 books written over hundreds of years by 40 different men as they were directly inspired by God. In 3 of those books, the book of Isaiah, the book of Job, and the book of Ezekiel, as well as throughout Scripture, we learn about the beginning of this process of turning away from God and what is good and turning towards evil and what is bad. In other words, we learn how sin first entered the world. For example, in the book of Job, chapter 38, God, in speaking to Job, says, "Where were you, Job, when I laid the earth's foundation, while the morning stars sang together?" Those morning stars were the angels, and Scripture describes how those angels sang songs of worship when God was miraculously creating the earth. But what is interesting, according to the book of Isaiah, is that one of those morning stars, Lucifer, who we know today as Satan, turned away from God and what is good and towards evil, and was immediately cast from heaven forever.
How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn! You have been cast down to the earth. You who once laid low the nations, you said in your heart, "I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." But you are brought down to the grave, to the depths of the pit.
So Satan, who was created to worship God, and to do so primarily through song and music, out of pride, turned from using his gifts for good to worship God, and used them instead for evil, to draw worship away from God towards himself. So it's not very hard to see how song and music would still be very much part of Satan's repertoire even today. Because if he was created to worship, created to sing, and to use music to bring praise to God before he was banished from heaven, then what but music would be his most effective tool for deceiving others and drawing them into his own wicked ways after he was banished, especially since music is so effective at grabbing the heart. It's not very hard to understand then how Satan can and does embed so much deception and rebellion into his music to draw worship away from God and what is good and towards himself and what is evil. But Scripture also sheds still more light on the subject of the occult in music and selling one's soul, because it tells us that once Satan was banished from his place in heaven, he continued his campaign to draw worship away from God and towards himself. And in that information, we see one of the greatest single litmus tests to whether or not something is good or whether it's evil. Does it draw you towards God and worshiping God, or does it distract you physically, emotionally, financially, or spiritually away from God and worshiping God? Satan's plot always has and always will be to take people's minds and hearts off God and to put them on other things, which leaves them open and vulnerable to drawing them closer and closer to worshiping himself. In Matthew's Gospel, chapter 4, Scripture even describes the occasion when the devil attempted to draw Jesus himself away from worshiping and obeying exclusively God and bowing down to him instead.
Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." And Jesus said, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, 'Worship the Lord your God and serve him only.'"
Satan was no match for Jesus, and Jesus turned him away without batting an eye. But ever since, Satan continues his campaign, and with far more successful results in some cases, against all of mankind, trying to draw the worship of humans away from God and towards himself, even to this day. And his strategy is no different today than it was 2,000 years ago. because he now offers people all over the world, including musicians, power and fame and riches, if they will only bow down and worship him. But there's only one answer to Satan's temptation, the one Jesus himself gave.
And Jesus said, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only."
Unfortunately, as we're about to see, many in the music industry have chosen to not follow in Jesus' steps, and in so doing have sold their souls for rock and roll.
Black Sabbath, who from the 1960s have been instrumental in turning countless of thousands of youth towards Satanism, did not leave any mystery as to whom they were serving when they titled one of their albums, "We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll." Black Sabbath was named after a satanic being that appeared to bass player Geezer Butler after he had already painted his house black and adorned it with upside-down crosses and depictions of Satan. This satanic being that appeared at the foot of Butler's bed is considered the fifth mystical member of Black Sabbath, who gave them the material for their first 3 albums. Ozzy Osbourne has admitted that he thinks that he is a vehicle being used by Satan, declaring, "I don't know if I'm a medium for some outside source. Whatever it is, frankly, I hope it's not what I think. Satan."
I was getting into, not practicing, but reading a lot of spiritualism and black magic and white magic and all that kind of stuff, and, which, you know, a lot of people were doing at the time, which is like the post-hippie generation kind of thing, so all the peace and love was going out the window. And spiritualism and meditation, all that was coming in, so I was interested in that. And somebody gave Ozzy this old 16th century book of black magic, and it was all written in, I think it was Latin. And he brought it round to my flat because he knew that I was interested in books and magic and all that kind of thing. And I just got this really weird vibe off it. And I put it in this cupboard in the apartment that I was living in. And that night, I just like woke up suddenly and there was just like this black shape at the bottom of my bed. And it just vanished into thin air as I was staring at it. And I just had the thought, it's got to have something to do with this book that Ozzy brought round for me, and I like leapt out of bed, rushed to the cupboard to throw this book out, and the book was gone. And the next day I told Ozzy about it, and about 3 days after that we came up with our first song, Black Sabbath, and Ozzy just like related my experience in the lyrics.
Big black shape with eyes of fire. Telling people their desire. Satan sending his smiling. Watches those flames get higher and higher. Oh no, please God help me.
We've always, within the band, said there is a fifth member, a mystical member, yeah. We've always said there's something looking over us.
And the only way that I can describe that, probably in its best, the best way for me is that when we were playing our first songs together, and especially our